Thank you. I hereby call the meeting of the Ordinance Committee for Monday, February 3rd, 5:40 p.m. to order. Good evening, everybody. This year's committee, Ordinance Committee for the year of 2025 is made up of Councilor Rodriguez, Councilor Farwell, Councilor Texera, Councilor Griffin, and myself, Shirley Azak, as chair. This evening's ordinance, there is only one item on this Ordinance Committee's agenda this evening, and it is a continuance from last year. So I would like to have Councilor Farwell, who was the chair last year, just give us a brief update of what, since it is a continuation. Councilor Farwell.
So, very briefly, ladies and gentlemen, we last met as an Ordinance Committee on the 8th of January. We had a great deal of dialogue back and forth. We had a presentation by the developer and legal counsel, and following that, there was a challenge to have the parties get together and to come up with some documents, changes, draft ordinance, zoning ordinance that would improve upon what was submitted. There was a meeting held. I was invited, but I thought at some point you like to have the politicians get out of it and let the professional development people come in, let the legal people analyze what they're going to do, and then come back to us. So I'm very pleased that Councilor Azak is going to chair the meetings from now on, and that we have some work product that I think is very, very beneficial. I thank the law department, I thank Attorney Burke, the developer, legal counsel, legislative counsel, Shannon Resnick, particularly Megan Bridges and Stacy Verdi from the law department. I did have a call with Megan and with Shannon this morning so that I would kind of be much more immersed into what we're going to do. And so with that, thank you, and I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Councilor. So right now, of course, our clerk, our legislative counsel, Attorney Resnick, could you read the ordinance?
Yes. Item number 1, ordinance. An ordinance to adopt a new section of the zoning ordinance to establish the Fairgrounds Overlay District for mixed-use residential, commercial, and light industrial uses for the parcels identified in the ordinance containing approximately 66.685 acres. Invited to attend, Philip Griffin, Ward 3 Councilor, Thomas Minicello, Ward 1 Councilor, Robert Mears Sullivan or his designee, Rob May, Director of Economic Planning and Development, Megan Bridges, City Solicitor or her designee, James Burke, Attorney, Andrew Flynn from Cooper Mill Development.
Thank you. Councilor Griffin, did you want to start to speak on this matter?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. I've been all for this project right from the get-go, and this is a project I believe can really transform the city of Brockton and start it to become a modern city. There are 66 acres of land available at the fairgrounds. We have a very qualified developer who's willing to invest between $600 million and $1 billion with a B dollars in our city. That is a huge investment in our city, and the amount of revenue we can generate from that type of investment could really change the way we handle our business in the city of Brockton. And the potential on Belmont Street for future development could easily double or perhaps triple the amount of tax revenue we could get from the fairgrounds. So I'm all for this. I want to get this thing moved forward, get it into council, and move along with it. So I'm very pleased we have it teed up tonight, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the developers and the stakeholders in it. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor. I know we have Councilor Minicello, but I'm not sure he's here yet. So, Mayor, would you like to speak on this matter?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, good evening. Robert Sullivan, Mayor of the City of Brockton. I'm really excited about this project. I sat up there for 14 years Councilor at Large. I served on the Ordinance Committee every single one of those years. So you have a really big job ahead of you. I want to also echo what Councilor at Large Farwell said. The lawyers have been phenomenal working on this. The goal of the overlay, and we've had successful overlays, most recently Thatcher Street, which is going to be where the nuns convent is, but medical marijuana in Ward 3, Councilor Griffin, was something that we took a lot of time on, but we got it right. The fairgrounds is the most important piece of property in the city of Brockton, right? Belmont Street is considered the new Main Street in the city of Champions. We need to be able to have really great development. We need to have the amenities that go with that green space. I even had mentioned a while ago, I would love to see some type of remembrance, a statue, I don't know, maybe a bronze Ferris wheel, because all of us enjoyed that property for the fairgrounds, for the Brockton Fair each and every year. I mean, I even worked there, for full disclosure, moving kegs of beer. But having grown up in Ward 2, and this abuts Ward 1, Ward 2, and Ward 3, I want to make sure that it's the right development. I believe that it will be the right development. It will be able to provide housing. And then the housing is also going to determine what other amenities will go there, be it commercial or industrial, whatever it is, it's going to be dictated. But at the end of the day, it starts here with all 5 of you to make sure that the integrity of the ordinance gets passed, with your colleagues supporting it as well. I will go on record saying I support it. I also want to thank the city planner and the solicitor. We've met many, many, many times in my office to talk about this. I know Megan and Shannon and Attorney Burke have worked tirelessly on this. So know that this is something that is going to be a game changer, a real catalyst in that area of the city of Brockton. But also know that we have to make sure we understand the traffic flows, because on Forest Ave, a lot of people use that as the main entrance to Brockton High. So I support the development, I support what's going on, but also an ordinance, this allows you during the overlay to decide what can't go there, and that's how we succeeded well on the medical marijuana on West Chestnut Street. So I will continue to advocate for this project. I think this is a project that, number one, is going to be a financial boom in terms of tax base for the city of Brockton, but we only get one shot at this. So again, I thank you for your efforts, your support, and let's roll up the sleeves and get the job done. I also want to thank a lot of the unions are here today, because this will be high-quality jobs for the unions and the labor and different groups as well. So I thank each and every one of you, and I'm going to hear and listen to the rest of the meeting tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. May, did you want to speak on this, or did you? I'm just going in the order that you're listed as invited guests.
In the order. Good evening, Councilors. Rob May, Director of Planning and Economic Development. I do want to echo the Mayor's comments. This is a very important parcel. I would say one of the most important on the Route 24 corridor. It will affect the future of Brockton. It'll affect the present of Brockton, and we have to get it right. We had seen a previous ordinance that was introduced in July. We had expressed the concerns with that ordinance, and we went back to the table and worked with the developer and their attorney, and it was Megan Bridges, I have to give her credit, for suggesting that we use the Thatcher Street Overlay District as a template for how we advance this process. Over the last couple of weeks, we have been honing and fine-tuning that proposal, and I believe a copy of that was sent to you all on Friday. It is something that we hope will be adopted, or that the original ordinance be amended by striking all the language and then replacing it with this language, so that we have a clean bill to move forward. And as we get time in the future, we'll come back and we'll discuss this tonight. We'll discuss the individual criteria within the proposed ordinance amendment to the amendment. Thank you.
Thank
It's
you,
confusing,
Mr.
I'm sorry.
Make a motion to substitute what's pending with this, and then allow.
So before he does his presentation. Sure. So at this time, I know we have Attorney Burke and Mr. Flynn here, but before they speak, I think if we can work with the amendment, does that, would you rather speak first, Attorney Burke, or would you like us to?
I would, if that's all right.
Okay, I will allow that, because that's and then we'll do the amendment.
Madam Chairwoman, members of the City Council Finance, and Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. It was an interesting project when it first came on my desk. I fully understand the import that this project will have in the city of Brockton, the impact it'll have in the city of Brockton, and the benefits it can provide to the city of Brockton. And certainly it is important that it be done right. There's no question about that. You have an exceptional young developer with a track record, got roughly 5,700 units now under development in the city of Boston and surrounding area. He may be young, but he's not a newbie. What we managed to do from a skeletal ordinance that was submitted, and we certainly acknowledge that because we were looking for input from the city as to how we best proceed. I really want to personally thank Megan Bridges, Stacy Beardy, Shannon Resnick, and certainly Rob May, because in the last 3 weeks, we've accomplished more than we have in the last year. And I think that's a credit to the city, and it's also a credit to the developer who is more than willing to work with you. The reason I asked to speak first, Madam Chairperson, is because we have submitted to the council a requested ordinance change that's different from Mr. May's. And it's really only different in a number of minor issues, with potentially one exception. We've adopted the vast majority of the language that was presented in the request for a proposal I received from Stacy Beardy last week. And it was a product of Mr. May's suggestion. And yes, it does include substantially more identifiable language, definitional language. It matches to a degree the language of the overlay district. However, that overlay district is a product of Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40R, which is really different than what we're dealing with here. As a result, some of the language that we suggested are, in fact, modifications of what the city had proposed. So what we'd like to do, and we tried to provide you with a red line showing exactly what the changes and additions were, is to have the developer's proposal submitted for acceptance to go before the council. That having been said, everybody here understands that we will not have an ordinance until it gets through the second reading and third reading of the city council. And you have the full ability to amend when it gets to the council prior to the first vote. We will not stop talking to the city. We will not stop talking to Attorney Bridges and Attorney Beardy. We will not stop talking to Mr. May, so that if there are any other minor issues that we can resolve, we will resolve them. And if we can't, we'll explain it to the council so that they can make a legislative decision on how to proceed. And that's really what we have to say today. It's an exciting project. It's been great for me to be part of it. I'd like to see the development come. I can tell you this, that Mr. Flynn has been talking with other individuals, and it seriously is their hope that they can get something going by the second quarter of this year if we're allowed to proceed. There's a lot of interest in housing right now. It's so critical because of the shortage in the Boston area. Brockton will only benefit from that as it has with people like Mr. Carmen, who's in the audience today. So that's what we have. We really hope that you move this forward tonight because we have a deadline statutorily, and we really don't want to redo the process before the city council, before the planning board, which requires the council to act on a final vote sometime in early March. Thank you. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer.
Yeah, I think right now, I know, Mr. Flynn, I skipped over somehow our esteemed city solicitor. I didn't see you there, so would you like to speak on this matter?
I'll take a moment, sure.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hello, good evening. I'll keep it very brief. Thank you to the mayor and thank you to Attorney Burke. I think that they set an excellent framework for where the discussions are now, and everyone's work has been commendable. in terms of a complex discussion and a really big opportunity. As Attorney, so I'm going to keep my comments very narrow. As Attorney Burke mentioned to you, he provided a draft of something tonight that is built upon our collective work over the past few weeks or so. There are a few differences. In our last meeting on this, essentially where we landed was the city has an opinion of a very small number of things that is different than that of the developer and Attorney Burke. And so we're hopeful that the conversation tonight can mostly just center on a couple of those things. I put the map up because one of the things that's important is what are we talking about? What area are we talking about? And it is not reflected on what you have in front of you provided from Attorney Burke. The overlay, what we've been discussing, is the overlay being about 46.5 acres, which is this huge parcel here and this small parcel here. And as Rob May has told you quite a few times, he'd like this to be townhomes developed along the edge over here. So this is the area that we're talking about. This is the area we've been working together on, and this is the area, and maybe some of this, but this is the area that would be an immediate future conversation to identify the acceptable uses there. The city, what's in front of you is 1,500 or 2,000 units by right. Those are the conversations we've been having. You know, it was never anyone's idea to have housing over the whole entire parcel. So that's one thing. And then, you know, there's small things like the percentage of green space, the number of parking spaces. One of the more complicated things is who is the permit granting authority? If you all decide 2,000 units by right is appropriate, who does the developer or its successors ask for permission for more than 2,000 units? That's one of the things that's left on the table. Other than those really high, ticket items, we have come to an agreement on all the other aspects of the conversation. I welcome any questions that you all have, but you maybe want to save them to the end. And I appreciate your consideration and giving this so much thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Solicitor. Mr. Flynn, did you want to?
Sure, and I will keep it brief, but first and foremost, I want to thank everybody for being here tonight, both members of the committee, the council, as well as members of the public. I know everybody's taking time out of their personal schedules to be here this evening, and I know it snowed today as well, so thank you to everybody for making the effort to come here. And Councilor Azak, it's nice to see you as chair of the committee, and Councilor Falwell, I really appreciate the discussion that you convened a few weeks ago. I think that was a very fruitful discussion, and I know it was a long night here, but I think it resulted in a lot of positive impacts. And absolutely, Solicitor Bridges, Stacy, Attorney Resnick, especially Rob May, we really appreciate the time. We've been engaged on a daily basis for the past 3 weeks, and we're very grateful for that. And I think, at a very high level, I just want to kind of echo what everybody said, both from the city side and the private side, which is, we always have had a recognition and an affirmation of the kind of sanctity of the fairgrounds site and the responsibility that comes with, stewardship thereof. And accordingly, that's why we've wanted to take a very deliberate and measured approach over the past year. And we know that there is still more work to be done, but we're grateful for the hearing tonight to hopefully kind of achieve another inflection point in the process, a process that, we think has been very collaborative, and I'm very grateful to everybody from Mayor Sullivan and his office to the CFO in his office, the assessor's office, lots of other folks inside this building and outside this building, the fire department, the police department, Department of Public Works, folks who have met with multiple times to try to really incorporate their input. And so, I'll pause there, but I want to say thank you to all of the members of the public and all of the elected and civil staff here at City Hall. And, I'll turn it back to Mr. Burke for some of the technicalities or Solicitor Bridges in terms of the best place to go from here. But And I think also, as Mr. Burke alluded to, we understand what's going to be set, potentially what's going to be up for a motion tonight is not necessarily cast in amber or set in stone. We certainly realize there will be, some modifications as we go here in advance of the council readings. And so, you have my word, we're not going anywhere, and we're here to continue doing that work in a very collaborative fashion with all stakeholders. And we really want everybody to be aligned. And thank you to everybody who's made this document possible over the past month or so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Flynn, and we appreciate you wanting to work with Brockton, so thank you. At this time, I think we need a motion to accept the amendment, or?
Yep, so let me just clarify what I have given you and what my suggestion is for tonight. So what I gave you is two versions. One, it's got the track changes in red, and it says LD/LC. That stands for Law Department Legal Counsel Edits. And then you have the clean version. So my recommendation, just kind of like procedurally, would be to start there, accept those, because the majority of that language, the developer is in agreement with. The other thing that I gave you, and you'll see printed in purple, are the developer's changes. And so what I think makes the most sense to do is to just accept the majority of the language that you see here from the law department, from the legal counsel, and then you guys can go one through one on the developer's proposals and provide your inputs and votes that way.
So we need a motion?
Madam Chair,
Councilor Fowler?
I'll move that for the record, that we accept the changes that have been offered by our legislative counsel and the law department, and then have a discussion with the developer and his legal counsel regarding any objections that they may have. They can voice them, and then we can have the law department respond as to why they feel a certain way that this should be written. And I think that will give us the best, most accurate picture for ourselves and for the public if we do it that way. So I'll move to admit the changes that have been submitted and substitute those for the original ordinance that was filed.
Yep, and if there's a second, I'll read those changes before you vote on it, because I think, just for the public, it is a substantial change than what was previously submitted. So I'd like to read the majority of that, if that's okay.
So a motion was made and properly seconded, so.
So let me just read those.
Sure.
Okay. So we would change the language from the purpose, and the purpose would read, "The purpose of the Fairgrounds Overlay District is to provide opportunities for new multifamily residential development while ensuring high-quality site planning, architecture, and landscape design that includes new construction, and to provide for a diversified housing stock within the neighborhood at a variety of costs, including senior housing and in housing types that meet current and projected future needs of the city's populations." This language does change the establishment and delineation of the Fairgrounds Overlay District, and it states that the Fairgrounds Overlay District is an overlay district that is superimposed over the underlying C2 zoning district. The boundaries of the Fairgrounds Overlay are delineated as existing lots known as parcels IDs 026-116 and 029-045. These sites are comprised of approximately 46.56 acres of land. The waiver language is deleted and inserted as site plan review. And it says development within the Fairgrounds overlay shall require site plan review in accordance with the procedures provided in section 27-, which will eventually be filled in during codification. The approvals language pretty much stays the same, except striking the last sentence of that paragraph that was in the original. Inserted as a number 5 is development agreement. Prior to the issuance of any building permits for the development of any parcels or subparcels within the overlay district, the owners and developers shall enter into a reasonable development agreement with the city of Brockton for the parcels relating to such issues pertinent to the parcels in questions. Then there's a whole section on definition. I don't need to go through all of those. I believe there might be 1 or 2 changes proposed by the developer just on some language from definitions, but that language from definitions is already contained in your Thatcher Street overlay district. That's where all of that came from. So that brings you all the way up until what's going to be a new section we'll call permitted uses. And This will state residential permitted uses as of right uses. Any principal permitted uses as stated in section 27-276 with any number of dwelling units up to 1,500 units, including but not limited to residential group development as defined in section 27-61. Any units in excess of 1,500 require a special permit from the planning board. Any use not specifically permitted in this article is considered prohibited. Then the changes to the residential standard, table, the lot depth, instead of saying none, would say for townhouses, 150 feet. Frontage for yards for single-family, two-family townhouses to be 20 feet. For three-family, multifamily, there'd be none. That same language is carried over for the side frontage. For the rear, it would be single-family, two-family townhouse, 40 feet. Three-family, multifamily, 5 feet. The green space to be changed from 15% to 25%. The green space language would read, for purposes of this provision, green space may be satisfied with an active or passive recreational use and may be provided on the roof or at grade. There would be an additional section added in for age-restricted housing units. An applicant may propose a residential or mixed-use development project in which all dwelling units are designed for or accessible to the elderly or handicapped under all applicable laws and regulations. All such development projects shall be governed by the requirements of this article and applicable design standards. The next part would just be to strike the commercial language, the technology, research language, and that brings you to the mixed-use provisions. We are inserting a new table that does not have any lot area or frontages or anything like that. The green space minimum is 5%, building height 7 stories or 85 feet. For mixed-use development, the language will say may only abut West Street. We're adding in prohibited uses here, and that will state any use which emits strong odor, dust particles, smoke, or poses any danger, such as manufacture of acid gases, fertilizers, glue, petroleum refining, reduction of animal matter, cement, or explosives, any other use dangerous to persons within or outside the district by reasons of emissions of odor, fumes, gases, particulate matter, smoke, noise, vibrations, glare, radiation, electrical interference, threat of fire, explosion, or any other reason. Any use not listed as a permitted, as of right use is expressly prohibited. Some changes in the parking language. It will have that a minimum of 1.5 parking spaces per residential unit. Include this language, parking accessory to any of the above permitted uses included surface, garage, under, and structured parking provided. However, on-site surface parking shall not provide more than 30% of the required parking project. We're going to strike the language that had previously been submitted for commercial and technology research and development. We're going to include this language, active uses within a mixed-use development. There shall be no minimum parking requirement for parking accessory to an active use. Disability access, parking shall be designed and constructed to comply with all applicable disability access requirements, including but not limited to Americans with Disability Act. We're going to have off-street parking language, and it's going to state location that was already there. And then we're going to add in a location and buffering of surface parking. Any surface parking lot shall, to the maximum extent feasible, be located at the rear of the building relative to any public right-of-way, public open space, or pedestrian way. Surface parking areas shall be shielded from the public right-of-way, public park space or pedestrian way of 7-foot wide landscape buffer yard. The buffer yard shall be separated into 2-foot auto overhead area and 5-foot wide densely planted landscape area. The two areas separated by a 4-foot non-obstructing decorative metal fence. A row of deciduous shade trees shall be planted, and the landscaped area not less than 1 tree for each 25 frontage. The next section I'm not going to read verbatim. A lot of this language, I believe, comes from our proposed form-based zoning on design standards, and it has design standards for the Fairgrade overlay district will be adopted by the planning board. And it addresses things like the materials, the grades, the features, the landscaping, lighting, roadways, and loading, and dumpsters. We're adding in that administration applicability Proposals for the development project in the Fairgrounds Overlay District shall require site plan review by the approving authority, plan approval authority. The approving authority may adopt administrative rules and regulations relative to the site plan approval process. Such rules and regulations and any subsequent amendment must be on file with the city clerk. There's language for pre-application review, application procedures, site plan review decision, criteria for conditional approval, and criteria for denial. There's a time limit on site plan approval shall remain valid and shall run with the land indefinitely, provided that the construction has commenced within 3 years after the decision. There's language for appeals and language about certificate of occupancies. There's language about fair housing requirement, and then there's language about change in plans after approval by the approving authority, what a minor change is, what a major change is. And then a freeze during the process for effectiveness and validity of the plans. And those just address different conditions that might occur during the planning process. The date of the effect was basically that this will become effective upon passage. Severability, we see that language, that if anything in the ordinance is deemed to be invalid, the remaining of the ordinance stays valid. Striking the rest of the language on loading, it's already addressed in the changes that are there. And then striking the legal description that you would find in the deed, and inserting what we do in Brockton is we, in order to change the zoning maps, we just identify the parcels. And so this language just identifies those parcels we talked about previously for the zoning map change for 026-116 and 029-045 to be the Fairgrounds Overlay District. So that's the summary of the changes, and there's been a first and a second on that.
Thank you. So we have a motion, and it was seconded, so we need to vote on it, correct?
Yes.
All those in favor? All those opposed? It passes. Perfect.
Now, do you want to go through the one that says developer?
Developer,
Okay.
yes, please.
Now, in fairness, we will need to hear from the developer and the law department as to like what they mean. I just have them and can help you make those changes to what you've just adopted.
Okay. Yes, please.
We have the law department stand by to maybe sit up here too.
Yes. Attorney Verity, could you also be up to just assist I did. You moved, there you go, Madam Solicitor, thank you.
We can switch back and forth.
Thank you.
Preliminarily, Megan is absolutely correct. What we've been talking about is a bifurcation because of, I think, some difficulty in reaching consensus. So the 46 or whatever acres it was, is a division line, is what we've been talking about as part of the overlay district. It's never been this developer's intention to make this an all-housing development. As you know from the original proposal, it was an industrial and commercial and residential proposal. So we will revisit that for the remaining land. We will again sit down with the city and work out how to best proceed. But as we bifurcated this, we want that portion of the property that's identified as the roughly 46 acres to proceed under the overlay. That having been said, the red lines, and I'm going to let my client identify some of the changes. You'll see that the vast majority of language was taken verbatim and accepted as part of the city's. I draw your attention on the red line of the developer to page 2. And as part of a prior discussion, it was identified that all the pre-existing uses that have been there since 1967, which is exactly, I guess, regurgitating the law for non-conforming uses, would in fact be accepted. I've been trying to shut this off. I apologize. Thank you. That was in the original language, we'll get there. That was in the original language, but I think it's important to, because of some preliminary comments that were made early in the process, to make sure that with clarity that there have been uses there since 1967, and they would remain as part of the allowed uses in addition to the existing ordinance uses under the C2 zone.
Attorney Burke, did you?
Just as we go along, it would be helpful to me, I don't know about others, give us first of all, wouldn't that be true anyway, without the language?
I'll agree, it's surplusage to a degree. But the question, one of the issues, the question, I guess, is...
Isn't that stated law? I mean, I'm not an attorney,
It
but
is.
if it's
It
been
is.
there, so
It is.
so it doesn't really carry that much weight, whether it's there or not.
I'm going to agree with you 110%. But it's surplusage, it wouldn't hurt either.
Okay, got you. Thank you.
You're good, Counselor?
Can I just ask the committee, do you want to address and vote on each one, or wait to the end after each one is discussed?
Or at the end?
One at a time.
Okay,
One
so-
at a time would be helpful to me, because I'm just going
One
to
at a
check
time,
off
then.
on his language that it's approved. I can say on this, that like on our version, we struck it because I don't think an ordinance is the right way to say that your prior uses, we're going to say, have all confirmed. Attorney Burke and Councilor Farwell are correct that would be true anyways. That's how an overlay operates. I just think it's unique to have an ordinance that says legally everything you did beforehand was conforming. That's all. My comment. I don't know if the solicitor agrees.
Counselor Rodriguez, you have a question, comment?
Yeah, I do. I do actually have a question for Attorney
Is the next
Burke.
one here? Excuse me.
Over here.
Counselor Rodriguez.
I'm a little to the left, was up there, now I'm to the left. For some of us that were not here back in 1967, you said you added that those pre-existing uses in operation since 1967. Could you possibly give us some example of what some of those uses were?
I believe that they used and have used for commercial storage a number of the old outcropping buildings that were there. Certainly, vehicles have been parked there industrially, commercially, continuously since 1967. Now, we're in fact continuing that mode with the City of Brockton school buses, which are there. And I believe that's allowed under C2 in and of itself. I think there's been some level of disagreement with the building department on that issue, but it clarifies, Counselor, that those school buses would in fact be allowed as commercial vehicles that have been stored there and utilized there since 1967. Those are a couple of examples.
But one needs to assume that we're in the process of developing this beautiful piece of land, that it's not going to become a parking lot for buses and stuff like that in the process, right? We're going through all of this because we want the beautification of this area, not necessarily to become, 15% developed and 85% parking area. That's not what we're looking for, right?
I agree. That we want the best product possible for the community. You wanted to add something?
Well, I'll just touch in general, and Attorney Resnick, thank you for going through everything a few minutes ago. And I think something that's very important for me to say just before we get into, going page by page is I think it's a testament to everybody, that we addressed earlier, especially Solicitor Bridges and Mr. May. The open item list was probably 300 items about 3 weeks ago, and we're down to probably less than a dozen that we're going to flip through here. And so I think everybody deserves, acknowledgement from the working group for how much has been done, and we're down to a very short list, and it's important to me that it's not perceived as, the developer nitpicking at the last minute here. I think it just so happened this afternoon, the volley was back in our court, and so kind of we're up here. But so anything we're going to go through here is all in the spirit of kind of collaboration and getting it done. It's not here to be us versus anyone else. And I think just one one other backdrop, I think one of the main goals we're just trying to solve for, we completely agree. We want to be held accountable. Parameters are important. There need to be certain guardrails in terms of, some of the items we'll talk about, uses, numbers, different things here. And I think the one thing we're just trying to make sure is that at the end of the day, we are all huge believers in Brockton. I have very, very deep personal roots here. I know everybody in this room is big believers in Brockton, both the history of Brockton, Brockton today, and the future of Brockton. And I think what we just want to make sure is that if the goal is to attract investment and ultimately tax revenue, that we're just not putting inadvertent barriers to entry up through some of these specific items. And so while we want there to be strict parameters, we also want to make sure, as we'll go through some of these items, that capital flows are, even in the past 2 weeks, they've shifted to the West Coast because of all the horrible fires. And so all we want to do is we want to make sure that to the extent folks do want to come to Brockton, ourselves included, and other partners we may bring, that the document kind of sustains through that. And I think we also don't want to be in front of a ZBA to spare everybody's time, each time going forward. But all that being said, any piece of the plan going forward will be subject to site plan approval and review. So I'll just pause there as the context for, some of the items. Attorney Burke, on that piece, I'll defer to you if it's...
Sure.
I'm sorry, Megan.
Councilor,
Can I sit over here with it? Does this work? Okay.
so I have a little bit of news for everybody. We have a special meeting that is scheduled in less than a half hour, so we're limited with time. I just want to make sure that we try to move as best as we can.
I'm glad you said that. So you're not going to hear from me on things like how many parking spaces, necessarily how much green space. That's not my purview. I'm a lawyer. In this particular thing you're considering, as you take it amendment by amendment, there is a legal process already to establish pre-existing non-conforming uses, and it is outside the ordinance. Attorney Burke and I have certainly discussed parking the buses over there, because you all should also remember, this is an overlay. Any existing C2 lawful use is preserved. So I don't disagree that our ordinances provide for the ability to park. It doesn't mean a garage necessarily can go there. I'm not saying that. But you are all creating an overlay over a pre-existing commercial zone. Anything allowed in a C2 will still be allowed in a C2. Part of the development agreement, which we're still working on, will, to the best of our abilities at this snapshot in time, try and deal with the issues of how much is going to remain C2, if any? How fast can the residential development occur? We don't have that in front of you tonight. So on the pre-existing non-conforming use situation, the grandfather, you don't need it. We don't need any more words on a page than are absolutely necessary. I learned that a long time ago. Every word should be like they cost you money on the page. If there's another way that answers it, that's dealt with in our ordinances, so don't make it more confusing for users. It would be my best advice. And I'm not going to talk about parking or green space, but that's my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Are you all set, Councilor Rodriguez?
Yeah, I tend to agree with the council, with our solicitor there, because, it scares the daylights out of people sometimes when you hear all pre-existing stuff that existed back in the days that some of us were not even in this community or around here. It sends a little, like one of those funny feelings in the sense, why was that put in there? First of all, let me basically come out and say, I'm for this project 100%, and we're going to move forward with this stuff. But when you see something like that, it kind of sends that uneasy feeling in the sense, why was it put in there if there are no, I don't envision that property having, other than minor commercial trucks or something like that, I don't envision it being a depot, a truck depot or whatever, for the community. So that's why it gives you that sense of uneasiness when you see that.
Councilor, your point is well received, understood, and I would hate to get hung up in this specific section because I agree that I think the law is still outstanding and clear. So we can move on from that.
Okay.
All set, Councilor?
Yep.
Councilor Farwell?
Yep, just in the interest of time, can we triage this? Tell us what you absolutely, because what we're discussing right now is what was put together by the Law Department and Legislative Council.
Right.
If we were going to change something, offer an amendment to include what you wanted, the amendment would be offered, and then we'd vote on it. Pick the things that you absolutely find so objectionable that you really need to discuss them tonight.
We'll do
If
that.
you could do that.
There are a couple of them, but we'll do that.
Okay, I mean, early on now.
Early on now, I'll direct you to
So we're
Page
not
8,
voting- we're not
which
voting
is,
on these things item by item?
the,
In this matter, we can't vote on each individual.
No, you can absolutely take further amendments.
Okay.
And if there's any that are not discussed tonight, I'll note them, I'll share them to make sure that there's still an opportunity to have the discussion, but I understand the objective to get the most important parts out of ordinance. You can still further amend when this goes back to the full city council.
Okay.
that administrative section is probably the most critical, Councilor Farwell.
All right, so it's
We added language called, which we had previously
What page is that?
sent as a statement of purpose, which is that the site plan review shall proceed expeditiously with time being the essence and without any unreasonable delay. These things are time sensitive. And that's a statement of purpose that the city and developer commit to, that once the process begins, it doesn't turn. I'm sorry?
4.
It's 8, Counselor.
8.
Page 8.
Okay,
page 8 of the,
of your paper.
Of what says on your developer.
okay, all right.
And the language he's referring to says, "Site plan review shall proceed expeditiously with time being of the essence and without any unreasonable delay." Bottom of the page.
Okay, yep.
That is useful for us because, and for any developer coming in, because it's really a statement of commitment purpose that you would move expeditiously.
I'm good with that.
So, Council Fowler?
But how would you enforce that, and what,
You don't enforce it, but what you do is you say to the planning board, when we're starting to go down a rabbit hole, that the commitment on these projects, which are many millions of dollars, and the intent is not to drag it out for 6, 8, and 10 months needlessly, but to expedite the hearing process, possibly 2 a month, possibly done in 2 to 3 meetings at the most. It's a conceptual thing that basically commits the developer in the city. It's not an enforceability, it's a statement of intent.
so why don't we put that language in there? Because unreasonable delay, obviously, if I was sitting in your chair, would be one thing, but unreasonable delay, if I were Mr. May, might be something entirely different. So why don't we put something in there, 60 days? So that all parties know that if something is pending and a decision needs to be rendered, the clock is ticking.
I don't have any problem with that, but I think Mr. May have a problem with 60 days, and we're more than willing to talk to him about that. 60 days may be too
No.
short.
He hasn't fainted yet. I see him sitting upright back
Can we make
there,
it 30
so-
days?
25. Counselor, in state language on expedited permitting, they have 120 days. I think we can split that in half and come up with 90.
90 it is.
90 works.
That works for us.
90?
So, for clarification, and shall proceed expeditiously within 90 days
Within 90 days.
90 days works.
of application. Okay, councilors, if you'd like to make it in the form of the motion, the language would read, we'd insert under administration.
So moved.
Read it.
Motion was made and properly seconded. All those in favor?
Okay.
Amendment moves.
And, is Andrew-
Number one critical, thank you very much for that.
And Andrew's all right with that?
Yes,
Yes.
90 days. Thank you, Counselor.
In terms of number one critical, it's a question of how we get through this process and arrive at, as we've really said from the beginning, we really need to have projects that are shovel-ready, except for site plan review. We believe the language is Section 5, criteria for conditional approval, attacks that concept. What it essentially does is, it adds language that comes from the 40R legislation that talks about a compliance or a denial that relates to the mitigation of extraordinary adverse impacts of the development project on nearby properties. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that standard is. And part of the problem is, as we all know realistically, having gone through a lot of this, once you get some activists involved in a certain area and raise specific issues, this seems to give the planning board the ability to deny a project on items outside of site plan approval, which has always been what the issue is. For example, and I mentioned this, everybody knows there's a traffic issue in some parts of the area surrounding the fairgrounds. It is disingenuous to suggest that having a development won't have some impact on that. The issue then is, if you have 100 abutting neighbors who are raising concerns about the amount of traffic, which are the responsibility, I believe, not of the developer, but the city, the state, and hopefully the federal government with some funding, that, you know, when an individual planning board member is getting 30 calls about a specific project, that denial is not based on what the intent of that being the site plan review. So it turns it essentially into a standard akin to a special permit it's discretionary with the planning board and not part of the regulations of site plan approval. That's an absolute fatal flaw from the developer's concern. You asked for the number one, this is the number one.
May I ask him a question?
Counselor Fowler.
And you've opened the door to my question. Do you want the planning board to be the entity to which you go for relief from this?
I don't see any other way around it. And I don't have a problem with the planning board. And I tell you, as you know, I'm a practitioner who goes before the zoning board, and I have a lot of respect for their knowledge and ability. But I think it would be an invitation for delay, and at best problematic, when you have two different boards expressing two different opinions on a project. It is certainly cleaner, faster, and I think more efficient to keep it all within one house. And I think the planning board, since they absolutely have to do site plan review, should be entitled to do the issues related to waivers and other things. Yes. So it's the planning board that we suggest is the proper vehicle.
And if I could, do we have a response from either legislative counsel or the city solicitor? Any thoughts on this? On this section and what's been raised?
What you have in front of you is a very concentrated and thoughtful overlay. What it suggests, in some fashion, is 1,500 or 2,000 units by right. So there is no approval, additional approval created by this ordinance for those units except what already exists for brand-new multifamily development, which goes through the planning board. So anybody who wants to build a multifamily building has to go through the planning board, okay? And then they don't have to, the developer, whom they may be, can create by right 1,500 to 2,000 units. You guys got to decide that or more, whatever you decide on that. And then if they want to do something outside of that, then that's where the planning board comes in, as what's written in here. And I think it's important to say the majority of what you have in front of you is what was submitted by my office, certainly in consultation with Jim. But the developer has always wanted the planning board. That's not traditional, although this language was borrowed from 40R. So it has happened here before at Thatcher Street. And why it makes sense from some people's perspective is because the development is pre-planned. It's thoughtful to some degree. You know what you're getting. So you don't need to convince the ZBA that this is, a use that should be within the community or it's a good project or X, Y, and Z. You kind of have that affirmation already. Where we have at least we've had some conversation, I'm not even going to call it disagreement, is what do you do when you want to get past 2,000 units? Do you go to the planning board? Do you go to the ZBA? The suggestion in front of you is to go to the planning board because this really is a master planned development. I think you should keep the language in there because we are trying to create some synergy and some kind of some synergy between the authority of the ZBA and the planning board kind of exercising that authority, which they never do. In Brockton, the special permit granting authority is always the ZBA, period. Here, there is a suggestion to use a different board, and that is lawful, but it's not what they normally do. So they should have as much guidance and input, I think, as possible on their decision-making. That, again, will not happen until they reach 2,000 units. And I would welcome any comments on Jim, because I'm trying to give you all as much transparency as possible. What's in front of you is a suggestion of planning board. What, you know, Jim is, we're not totally fighting over that, although that's not traditional here. What's being asked is the removal of specific criteria. And I think you all need to think about that a little bit, is how much direction does this ordinance need to give the planning board? Because that would be their only direction, is what's in here. And that's really all. They're a permissible board, they're equipped, more than capable, but this is not what they normally do.
Just stay here for a second.
Sure.
Good thing to talk these things out. I don't think I've misread this section, because I don't think this section relates only to beyond 2,000 units. I think this section relates to the site plan process and approval in general. So you would take one building, it's got 500 units in it. I believe that based on this language, they could issue a denial based on, you know, undefinable criteria about adverse impacts in the development of neighboring properties. That's the problem. Getting to the point where it becomes discretionary, like a special permit, really takes it out of the realm of an as-of-right project, which substantially affects the ability to secure financing for a big project like this.
But isn't that true of a lot of development, that it's subjective rather than objective?
No,
I
not
mean,
that.
you have people sitting on the planning board, and as you say, they may or may not get calls, they may or may not have a preconceived idea of what a particular project is going to do, or some change is going to accomplish. I mean, isn't it always going to be, either unfortunately or fortunately for the developer, a subjective decision by the planning board member?
It certainly is, and I'm okay with that, provided, as it goes further in the cutoff that we put, that the project denial would be only if it doesn't meet the requirements of the article and sections 2785 through 89, which is site plan review. So that's the standard, site plan review. Not an ethereal concept like adverse impacts, which I have no clue what that means. And I got to admit, it does exist in the statute under 40R. Somebody decided that it meant something.
I did not write that.
But I just don't know what that means, and that's the problem.
All right, so I'm sitting here trying to strike a balance.
And I'd like to offer you a balance, especially in the interest of time. You all take up the number of units, suggesting you take up the number of units you want to allow by right. Condition this restrictive language on criteria to my comments were units above the number by right. Because it is the city's position that we're bringing you a project where the developer is proposing to build 1,500 or 2,000 units by right. That is the plan. No one is trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes on the plan. So no one is suggesting until right now that we would create additional conditions on top of the as-of-right units. This language should apply to the non-permitted, special permit needed units.
I think that's a great suggestion. I don't have a problem with that. So if anything over the allowed uses as provided in the ordinance that they seek additional approval for, then having that restrictive language, I understand why under that condition, because you basically changed the playing field. So I don't have a problem with that.
Right, so how,
Can we counsel on that language, and then if you guys refer this out of committee, we can counsel it before second reading or final passage on the approval criteria for condition approval section?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay,
Next.
next most serious one?
Do we need to vote on this?
No.
Not on that, no, we'll talk further.
Do your,
Okay.
Musical chairs.
That kind of is what the Jim Burke problems are. The rest of the changes, Andrew can identify, which relate to things like the surface parking will be no more than, what was it, 50%?
30%.
30%. And that whole issue, I guess, goes to the fact that when you're doing the construction, do you require garaging space, which is a considerable expense in these days, and it's only going to get worse. But Andrew, do you want to discuss any of the other changes, green space, parking, any of that?
Sure, I can touch on those. And Attorney
pages.
Yes, Attorney Resnick, if any of these, if it's useful procedurally to kind of bucket them and have a separate discussion, or, I'll defer to you for procedural direction. And again, we're not here to go line by line. I think really the one thing, and we worked closely with our architects over the weekend on this, was just trying to make sure that the whole project and the whole site is a Rubik's Cube. And what we just are trying to make sure, and I'll say, and to Megan and Rob's credit, all of the spirit of everything in here, we agree with it in terms of we should have oversized sidewalks, we should have, certain outside areas covered or screened as much as possible. And what we just need to do is, it's hard to comply with all of them at once in terms of green space square footages, parking square footages, things like that. So really all we've tried to do with a handful of them is just moderate them slightly so that we actually can comply with them. For instance, I'm on the developer red line, page 8. The 15-foot sidewalks, we had marked it down to 12. That's one that I would rather leave 15-foot sidewalks. And so I'd actually prefer to strike my own change because I think sidewalks are better for the public and broader stakeholders than some of the other ones that we'll come to. So that's one we can ignore. In terms of service areas, screened or covered, that's, instead of internal means it all has to be fully built and, fireproofed and weatherproofed and all of that. And we understand that they want to be aesthetically pleasing, but we just wanted to moderate that standard a little bit. That's all for page 8. Going to page 9, there's nothing there. Going to page 10, and I think I might defer some of this approval language. Shannon really seems to fall more into the sidebar that we're going to have in terms of a public hearing and other things. So that's probably better suited for that discussion. In terms of moving curb cuts, 30 feet, we asked for 50, but we'll agree to 30. Again, I don't want to get bogged down in small details here. And then I think the only other, on page 3 of the developer red line, this is really just a minor technical change, just occupiable area, which just excludes elevator shafts and mechanical rooms and transformer vaults. And I think we had moved the green space from 25% to 15%, which is a number we've kind of been at consistently throughout this. I think we could maybe agree to split and go to 20%, if that's something that folks would be open to. On page 6, mixed use, we agree with all the mixed use language throughout the ordinance. It seemed to be only limited to West Street here, so we wanted to at least allow for mixed use on the other perimeters of the site. If we wanted to exclude Thurber Ave, we could, but we thought that activation on some of the other adjacencies was something that was consistent with all of the discussions we've had. And then on parking, parking's always a funny one, and I can tell you, I'm sure we all have experienced it in different projects. It manifests itself in different ways. We're believers that less cars lead to less traffic and, more encouragement on taking the bat and, other uses of public transportation that ultimately reduce traffic. So in the spirit of mitigating and minimizing the traffic impact, we had a parking minimum of 1.25 parking spaces. So again, Shannon, forgive me, I'm kind of going through that. These are just the minor ones, but I want to at least contextualize the reason for those changes, and I certainly defer to the committee in terms of the best way to address those, either individually or in whole.
Councilors, given the time, what I could do, because we're going to need to talk offline anyways on those conditional approvals, is I can try and work together on something for conditional approval languages for adoption that is agreeable, and then just kind of a checklist of things the developer's looking for changes, and then you all can make your decisions if it's 1.5% parking or 1.25% parking, if the green space is 25% or 20%, and then just, we'll checklist it at one of the council's meetings, either at passage to third reading or final reading. We do have to have the public hearing again, so maybe the input from the public might affect your decision on some of those items.
Sounds good, councilors?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay, sounds good. Attorney Resnick, so I
Motion.
know we're limited with time. I apologize. We had this special meeting that kind of popped up.
Motion to recommend.
There's a motion to,
Recommend as amended.
Favorable as amended?
Second.
a motion's been made and properly seconded to recommend the amendment as amended. So all those in favor? All those opposed? The amendment passes. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you for your time, members of the
Thank you.
council.
And thank you to the guests in the gallery
Thank you very much,
tonight.
Madam
Thank you
Chairwoman.
very much.
Can you just do a motion to adjourn real quick?
What?
Motion to adjourn.
Yes, we need a motion.
To adjourn.
A motion's been made to adjourn and seconded. All those in favor? All those opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.